Hello, everybody. Welcome. We're just getting started up now, and I'm welcoming in guest presenter Adam Belinsky of Crescendo to share his insights and advice with us on law school prep, 1L prep, what to be doing in that summer before law school, in the first year of law school to set yourself up for success. There's a chat function here on the right sidebar of the Zoom app where you can ask questions and you can share advice and insights. And so I invite you to leave chats there. I'm typing in their chat box just so you can see it. And I'm going to invite Adam to join us now. Adam,
Hey,
good afternoon. Hey, Adam, how you doing?
hey, I'm doing well. It's so good to see you. Let's see, can you hear me all right?
Yeah, I can hear you great. You're coming through loud and clear. I'm also going to allow you to record this on your end just in case of anything.
Okay, yeah, I'll go ahead and get that going.
Awesome, excellent. So Adam, did you ever get your daughter that dog?
She's saving up for it. Yeah,
Responsibility, nice. I love it.
yeah. And actually the other day we were at the store and she was tempted by some candy or something little like that. And she's like, no, I got to keep it for the dog. If I do this, it'll take me that much longer. But yeah, she's a sweetheart.
If you give her a quarter in allowance a week, it'll take her 20 years, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it just would be the way to go because then she'd be out of the house. But I've also got Grant here with me. He's in the background. He's going to help me out in monitoring the chat. If you guys have any questions, you're welcome to put anything in there. And then also, if you stick around to the end, he'll hook you up with a discount code for some Crescendo stuff.
Nice. Awesome, Adam. So I understand you started Crescendo out of your experience as a top law student, right? You got top 5% on the UB, is that correct?
Yeah, the Uniform Bar Exam. And I was just trying to pass like everybody else. And I was using a different type of methodology that allowed me to go golfing, allowed me to spend a lot of time hiking. Obviously, I did practice questions and things, but I used the same basic approach that I used during law school as I was prepping for the bar exam. And it worked out well for the bar, just like it had during law school. So
awesome. Well, I'm really excited to connect with you once again and share your advice with my audience. We've already done some discussions on your YouTube channel, which we'll encourage folks to check out afterwards. But in the meantime, I want to turn this over to you to give your presentation and share your screen or slides or whatever you like. So I'll just leave it to you to take it away.
Sure. All right. Well, thank you, Steve. I really appreciate you putting this on and giving me that introduction. I'm going to share my screen with you and just kind of walk through some fun slides. Hopefully this works all right. Obviously I founded a company and I care about that company. I'm passionate about that company, but I really, really want this webinar to be beneficial to you, regardless of whether or not you look into Crescendo. I don't want this to feel overly salesy. I am passionate about law school, law students. I actually work for a law school now as well as, still keep my hand in the Crescendo pot. So what I'm going to start with actually has nothing to do with Crescendo at all. It has more to do with study groups. And I'm just curious, feel free to chime in on the chat, who we're talking to here. If you're a 0L, maybe just chat, type 0L in. If you're a 1L, go ahead, type 1L. So I know if you're somewhere else, beyond that, that's totally cool. Or if you're prior to that, that's cool. I'm just curious kind of what audience we're working with here. So a couple 0, okay, some folks studying for the LSAT. Exciting, makes sense. If you're connected with Steve, you're studying for the LSAT. Hopefully that's going well. I remember those days very well. And, anytime I hear about folks getting into law schools via the GRE or even the ACT, I've heard some schools will take your ACT score if it's high enough. I go, you didn't have to go through that whole LSAT experience. You're so lucky. I actually talked to 2 law students this morning that got into a fantastic law school because of their ACT score. And I just think that's cheating, but good luck to you that are taking the LSAT. And looks like we've got one L here. So that's exciting. Thanks for joining us. I don't know if your semester started yet, but if it has, that's really awesome of you to take some time to spend with us. All right, so let me just tell you about study groups. And first I'll tell you the why behind the what. I am a very social person, and I found that the law school environment was not the most ideal environment for my learning style. Prior to law school, I was a corporate trainer, and prior to that, I was a TV reporter for a CBS affiliate. So I love people, love being out and about with people. I love teaching. I love being in a classroom. I love public speaking. And so in law school, it can be very isolating. You can spend a lot of time we had these desks at our law school called carrels, and if you're not careful, you can spend 6 to 8 hours a day just at your carrel alone, reading and typing up some notes for yourself. And then you go to some classes and they help break things up. And, those can be really interesting and a little bit more engaging, and you might participate. You might, get called on and have a little bit of the Socratic method experience, or you might volunteer your hand, engage that way. And so the in-class experience for me at law school was awesome. I always loved it. But the traditional sit down and look at a book and study in isolation the whole time, when you're outside a classroom, that was not working out for me. And, I had heard about study groups prior, and people had recommended study groups, but the traditional study group model just didn't seem like a really good fit for me, because I had a lot to juggle. I had, I still have, I've got some kids. I had 3 kids when I graduated from law school. I had jobs that I was trying to do, not so much my first year of law school, but I had lots of jobs my second and third year to provide for my family, so my wife could stay home with the kids. And so, and I also had some community responsibilities, some service opportunities in my church and things like that. So I've got all these things to juggle. And the last thing I wanted, even though the traditional way of studying on your own is kind of isolating, the last thing I wanted was another thing on my to-do list that wouldn't necessarily translate to better grades or better job prospects. And so the idea of doing a study group at first, I shied away from, because my understanding of traditional study groups was you get together after the fact. You've done the reading, you've prepared for class, and you get together and you just talk about what you read. You kind of debate doctrines, you talk policies. And while that's all good and awesome, if you're in a pinch when it comes to time, it's something that wasn't appealing to me, even though I thought it would be a lot of fun to do that kind of thing. I just didn't have the time for that. Like, I needed a study group that would save me time and cut out some of that traditional, sit down, stare at the book, and prepare for class time, so I could keep my life in balance. And so I got this idea for a different type of study group that wasn't so much about debating doctrines and getting together and just chatting organically and, in my mind, inefficiently, and instead created a new system that I found to be really successful. Everybody that I approached with this idea at first, when I walked up to them, I didn't know these people. I mean, they were classmates. I didn't know if they'd be good students. I knew really nothing about them. I just approached 6 random people, and I said, "Hey, I'm thinking about starting a study group. I'm thinking this is kind of the methodology I want to use with this study group. I know that sounds kind of weird and different, but if you could just join for like a 2-week trial period and see how you like it, and if you don't like it, you can quit my study group." That was the offer I put. And all 6 of these people I approached said, "Yeah, sure. Yeah, why not? I don't have a study group, and that sounds interesting. We can give it a try." And so I got all these random people together with me, and we tried this new methodology. And after the 2 weeks, every single one of them stayed on. And we actually had more people join our group too. It didn't get crazy big. I think we maxed out about 8 people in our group, and which ended up being really, really helpful. At first, I didn't think that would be the ideal size, but for me, it ended up working out well. So you're probably wondering, okay, so what was the study group actually like? How is it different than more traditional study groups? I'll explain. I'll try to explain as quickly as I can, because this is just one part of the stuff I'd like to cover today. So in a nutshell, there's this concept of dividing and conquering the different classwork you need to do, returning and reporting, so teaching, and ultimately saving time and getting better results. The way we worked it out is we had 3 core classes that we were all in together. We all had torts, we all had contracts, and we all had property. And what we would do is we would rotate every week who would be the expert, or actually the experts, because we had 2 for each subject area. And what the experts would do is, instead of just reading the case law for themselves, they would read it with their study group in mind and with teaching in mind. So they actually had to do a little bit more reading, and they'd have to do a lot more careful note taking, because everybody else in the study group would be relying on their notes. The reason we had 2 experts for each subject on each week was that we have kind of an internal audit system, basically the safety net, where every single class we would go in with 2 sets of notes from 2 different perspectives from students who had prepared very thoroughly. And so I found this to be super beneficial and also a time saver. And I'll talk about a bunch of the benefits, but one of them was this: if you're just studying for yourself, you might start out in law school just really gung-ho, really on the ball, reading cases very critically and carefully and taking great notes. But after a couple weeks, it's more than likely that it's going to devolve to some skimming, basic survival mode. You might start having some papers, some memos or briefs due, and those will encroach on your traditional, coursework. And you might look for some commercial, case briefs online, and those can be a little bit more superficial, and they certainly don't cover the notes in between the cases that your particular casebook might have. And I had a professor that really hammered those post-case notes that weren't part of the case, I think in part to see if we were actually, quote, doing the reading. And so what I liked about this method is, on the weeks when I was the expert for a subject, I never skimmed. Like, I never got into any bad habits. Anytime I read cases, I read them very critically because my team was relying on me. And I also took very exact and detailed notes because I knew my study group was relying on me. And so I actually think this study group model made me a more critical case reader and a better attorney when I graduated. And so we kept this rotation where every week you'd be an expert for a different subject. So that subject area, no particular subject area would get too foreign for you, right? The furthest you'd go without reading a case would be a couple weeks. You'd have, you do torts one week, next week you do contracts, next week you do property. And actually, when our study group grew just a touch, we had a couple extra people, and what we were able to do is have a week off of being an expert about once every month-ish, which was really good and helped with other assignments like our briefs, memos, and things that we had at the law school that I attended. And so when you were a non-expert for a subject, what you would do is 2 things. One, you would read 2 sets of thorough notes, ideally the night before a class. I mean, there's lots of research about, memory and things like that, but you certainly get more bang for your buck if you study right before bed, because it's in your head, it's kind of digesting as you sleep. And so what I would do is just, the 40 minutes or so before I went to bed, I would read over 2 sets of notes for, say, contracts, if I'm not the expert in contracts a week, and then I'd read 2 sets of notes for property if I was the non-expert for that. So say it's my torts week. So I do really thorough reading and note-taking for torts. That would take me longer than usual, longer than if I just did it on my own, right? Because people are relying on me. But then I save time on these other subjects because in the course of 20 minutes, I could read through 2 sets of notes for that subject. And so I spent about 40 minutes before bed, just read over those 2 sets of notes. And it was always interesting because you'd get a lot of similarities between the notes, but you'd also catch some nuances. Sometimes there'd be some ambiguities, some things that you'd have questions about. And so what would you do with those? Well, 20 minutes before each class, regardless of whether you were an expert or a non-expert, we'd get together as the study group. And if you were a non-expert, you could ask questions of the experts. And if you were an expert, then you could, enjoy that time teaching and further cementing what you had read and what you learned and what you communicated through your great notes you'd have the opportunity to cement that knowledge by educating your group. And so everybody in our study group had opportunities to teach, had opportunities to ask questions. It was crazy how often the questions that we had ended up being the types of questions that our professors would ask in class. And it would be so refreshing to be like, oh, we just talked about that. You know, my lips are actually used to talking about that particular concept. And it took a lot of the fear and anxiety out of the classroom experience. And I don't believe that any professors ever suspected that we didn't, do the reading, at least in the traditional sense. I mean, we certainly were well prepared, and I would argue more prepared than we would have been had we not used this model. And so if you look at, the entire model, yes, you're spending more time when you're an expert, but that time is meaningful because you're using that time to basically serve other people in your study group and to teach them to practice critical reading and comprehensive, detailed, accurate note-taking, because they're relying on you and you don't want the other guy's notes to be like way better than yours. So it wasn't really a competitive aspect, but it was a check on each of us knowing that we weren't the only people doing the notes. And we wanted to make sure that people knew that we would, tow our fair share of the load. But in the subjects where you're non-expert, I mean, you spent 20 minutes reading over some notes and you spent 20 minutes before class. And both of those experiences for me were really enjoyable, especially the 20 minutes before class. And then occasionally, because our group was so big, we had some weeks off where we could focus on other things. And so I felt like I averaged, I didn't keep critical or super detailed, specific track of how many hours I was at law school because I'm not that OCD. But I think on average, I did about 30, 35, maybe 37 hours of law school stuff a week, which gave me ample time to take care of my family, to pursue extracurricular type things. And then on my second, third tier, work and build my network with potential employers. And so that's a little bit about the model that we use. And I apologize, I could have clicked a little bit sooner on some of this, but this is just rehashing what I just explained to you. So you get this opportunity to read 2 sets of notes, 20 minutes the night before, 20-minute before class, ask questions and review. And for whatever your assigned subject is, whatever you're the expert in, you read thoroughly, take awesome notes, right? Because folks are relying on you. After this study group went so well, my law school actually found out about it, and they invited me to present to 1Ls and actually 0Ls a couple times on the model. And so I don't think professors are turned off by this approach. I know sometimes people will be like, oh, you got to do all the reading. Like, you don't want to be lazy. But it's about working smarter, not necessarily working in a more time-consuming way. And the friendships I created in my study group, I mean, they've been lifelong. And actually, tomorrow I'm flying to Canada to go to a wedding of one of my buddies in the study group. And I think 6 out of the 8 of us are all flying to Canada for the wedding, which is crazy, or driving. A couple of them took a big trip like through Yellowstone and things like that. And so that's how tight-knit we are. Like, we laughed together, we cried together. They're some of my very best friends. And so that was another benefit of using a study group, and using a study group like this where you could really give and take. And it's been fun to kind of see where everybody is wound up. I've got a friend from my study group that's working for the FBI. I've got one who right out of law school went to this huge firm in London, making $270,000 a year, which is insane for fresh out of law school. I've got one friend that went into legal aid, one that's working in a tech company. There's me, founding a bar prep company and doing some other things, and some more traditional, small, mid-sized firm. Got one who's just killing it in real estate. And so we got a great variety, in our study group, and that was nice because it gave us some great perspective. And when you become really good friends with your classmates, I think it helps you chill out a little bit when it comes to the curve and the competitive aspect. I remember thinking, you know what? These guys are awesome, and I would not be embarrassed if any of them outperform me on grades, because that's how highly I think of my classmates. And it was really fun to see how we ended up doing, as a study group. This model worked really well the first year because we were all in the same classes. Second and third year, not so much, because everybody's in different classes. There's a lot more choice, at least at the law school that I went to. But it was interesting to see, in the first year when we were using this model, almost across the board, everybody outperformed themselves academically than when they were flying solo after, or more solo. I mean, we still use the model in some cases. Maybe we just create a mini study group for one class, and so we'd rotate just for that class, and you could just team up with 3 other people and rotate every other week who's doing the reading, or 6 or 5 other people and rotate every 3 weeks. So that is a little bit about how I use my study group, a little bit more toward the finals season. One thing that I recommend you do, even if you don't use the study group model that I described, is just getting together and doing practice exams. One thing that's really nice about it is test anxiety is a huge part of the law school experience. And it's really nice to practice in a safe setting, like do a timed real kind of mock exam with your study group, and everybody's just hammering away on their keys, on their keyboard, and you just hear everybody like clacking away, and you feel the intensity, and you can kind of manufacture the same type of real exam day intensity in an informal, zero consequence setting. And then you can talk about the issues you spotted and kind of share things after you do the practice final. So we did a fair number of practice finals in our study group. We just got a study room, we sat down together, we started a clock, and we felt a bit of the intensity that we would feel during actual finals. And this was actually a bit of advice that someone gave me my very first week of law school, who had done really well in law school. He said, don't wait till the end of the semester to look at some old finals. Some professors publish their past finals online, and you can look at those, and you might as well see kind of what the target is early, and then you have a better idea of how to study. So practicing with finals doesn't have to happen just in that last week or 2 before finals. I mean, you could do one mid-semester, and you could even like crack open some of the finals just at the start of the semester, just to get an idea, what does this professor's final look like? Now, not every professor publishes their finals, obviously, and so that gets a little bit trickier. If there aren't any previous finals out there, there are some other ways you can practice. You can search finals at other schools, in particular, reputable schools. I know there's a lot of the top tier schools that do have some final databases that you can look at. Those can certainly be good. And then certainly if you buy Crescendo or another bar prep company that gives you official NCDE practice questions, you can access past bar exam essays and past bar exam multiple choice questions, and you can do that all through law school if you get lifetime access, and that's what Crescendo offers students. And so again, don't mean to plug Crescendo too much. Before I go on, I just want to just see if we've got any questions about the study group stuff before we talk about my next real passion part.
I have a few questions.
Okay, Grant, yeah, help me order some of those questions that are coming in.
So one, they want to know what law school you went to.
Yeah, so I went to BYU Law School, and a great law school. By some rankings, in terms of student competitiveness, actually in the top 5 for most competitive students, and like cutthroat and stuff. I didn't feel it because I had this great support network. And I think the U.S. News currently says we're number 39. I don't know how much rankings, like you can always take it with a grain of salt because there's so many different metrics to look at, but I love my experience at BYU Law School. I was fortunate to get a scholarship with them, and that helped me tremendously with my family and gave me a great education. Any other questions?
Yeah, this is an interesting question.
Okay.
Emily asked, I wonder if you can have your books cases read to you via Dragon software as an audiobook.
Yeah, you totally can do that. Obviously Dragon software is competitive competitor software to drag in, you know, there's some weaknesses with it. It's not always the most engaging, but definitely you can do that, and that's a great idea in terms of getting away from your screen or getting away from your books. I found some cases online through a company not affiliated with us at all called Audio Case Briefs, and I thought those were really helpful. And it's just they would have actual cases top to bottom. And so not all the cases in my casebook would be on there, but the ones that I found on there I thought were great, because, you know, I could help out around the house cleaning, and I could listen to the case top to bottom. And so I believe that company was called Audio Case Briefs. And the law library at our school had a subscription, so I can't speak to how expensive it is. I think it costs something. I don't think our school got it for free, but that was nice. But for sure, if you've got Dragon and you've got the digital versions of your casebook, that would be a good way to, you know, infuse some more balance into your experience. Any other questions about the study group approach?
I think we're good. Thanks again for the last question.
Okay, perfect. Well, that's great. Yeah, just please interrupt with questions. This isn't really scripted. It's just, you know, let's have a chat about what's most helpful for you guys. So we talked about study groups. Really love the idea of rotating experts for a lot of the reasons I mentioned. One other thing I want to say about study groups. Something so critical is getting a relationship with your professors where they know you're taking things seriously, they know you care, they know you're professional, but you don't want to ever come across as brown-nosing, as sucking up to them, right? As trying to just, like, I don't know, get, you know, charm them in some way that somehow if they, you know, knew what your exam was or whatever, they give you a better grade or they give you a better referral because you've charmed them. So, and so it's this delicate balance, right? You want to engage, you want to participate, but you don't want to come across as trying too hard to impress your professors. And what I've loved about study groups is it can protect you from all the bad things of being engaged while giving you all the good things of being engaged. I'll give you an example. You have a question that your study group just cannot figure out on its own. Well, you go as a group to your professor's office hours and you say, hey, you know, we've been working together and we've been talking through this and we just like can't understand proximate cause, or, you know, this is our specific question. Can you help us out with that? What I love about that is your professor sees you're a team player. You collaborate. It isn't just about you. You've already done your homework. You've worked together. It's not you just being ignorant or being lazy. You've got a whole team of students, and so there's no way you're all ignorant and lazy. Like, there's got to be just something fundamentally complicated about what you're asking a question about. And that, I mean, if you contrast that to just going solo to your professor, I mean, there's just so many ways that conversation with your professor can go wrong. You know, they might be wondering, okay, well, maybe this person didn't do the reading. Maybe this person is just making an excuse to talk with me, to kind of suck up to me. You know, there's just so many problems with approaching your professor one-on-one. There are certainly contexts where that can be fine, but I think establishing just this pattern of approaching as a team is going to create a much stronger impression of you and all your team members than going solo, if that makes sense. So I hope that's helpful. That's all I'll say about study groups.
Yeah, one more question.
Oh, okay, another question. So it won't be all I'll say about study groups.
So this is from Rita, and it's a good question. They asked, what if I'm a solo studier?
You know, we had a solo studier in our group who would do all the reading for every course, but still participated in our study group. And so even on their non-expert weeks, he would do all the reading. And he was, you know, really, really competitive. He ended up doing really well in law school. because of that work ethic, and he had the time and the flexibility to do that. And so, I mean, I don't fault him for doing it. I think it's great. He was actually my friend that ended up going to London and making loads and loads of cash. But yeah, so that's one way you could do it. I mean, if you really are uncomfortable with not doing the reading in certain classes, there's nothing to say you can't have a study group like this, get all the benefits I talked about, but also do the other reading. Obviously, it takes more time, but if you have the time, for sure, put the time in. I mean, you're just building, the possibilities for your future profession. And so, if you are just so introverted that the concept of a study group is stressing you out, then by all means, like, there is no silver bullet. I don't think study groups are for everybody. And there's certainly a place for you at your law school and a place for you in future law firms and practice, being kind of that just solo, really strong, totally comfortable and getting energy from that quiet alone time. And but that's not me, and that's not some other students, but that doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. That said, there is something to be said for getting out of comfort zones, engaging with people if you are extremely introverted. A big part of law practice, if you end up practicing law, or most professional opportunities these days, is interacting with people, collaborating with people, working as a team. Usually there's a couple partners and associates on really big cases. And so to get comfortable with that dynamic earlier in a less risky setting could be good for you, but you want to strike a good balance. I mean, if it really wears on you, maybe do a study group for one class and then do the other one solo. And then once you get comfortable with that, maybe do a study group for a couple classes. But there really is no silver bullet for everybody. I'm just sharing, what worked for me and what I've seen with some other students, but by no means do you need to take it as like the Bible. Any other questions? I think I see some more comments on the chat. Let's blink in.
Thanks for having us ask a question.
Yeah, unless you hang your own shingle. Let's see. I guess that's yes. Oh yeah, so we were all 1Ls. We were all at the same school. And
do you see the question? I wonder if this has been studied in school. So
interesting. Yeah. So part-time, full-time, and LLM students. Interesting. Yeah, so, one of the conveniences of the model I described was we were all in the same courses. We weren't in the same courses with all our classmates, but we had like this core group, which I really liked. But there's certainly going to be law school experiences where the stars don't align quite as well. And so you'd want to combine with classmates and create a study group on a class-by-class basis. It gets a little bit trickier logistically, but it certainly would be doable to have smaller study groups or have a study group for just one class. And so even if you're part-time, you're going to a class and you could find some classmates and maybe work with them. I'm not sure, Emily, if that totally answers your question, but feel free to re-ask it if I'm missing the mark. Were there any moments when you felt like someone wasn't, interesting? In our group, I didn't really feel like there were any moments where people weren't pulling their own weight, which surprised me. I actually thought there was this one guy who wouldn't, which is horrible to be so judgmental, especially since I didn't know him very well. But just to give you an idea about this particular guy and his personality, he never, not once, and not even yet, has ever looked at his grades in law school. I don't know how he did that. Like when time would come to apply for things, I know how he did it, because he would have, a parent or a sibling or a girlfriend put in that part of the application to the extent grades needed to be mentioned. And so other people around him knew, but he did not want to know, and he didn't tell us, and he didn't know, which is crazy. So you might think, okay, if somebody's like that, then maybe they just don't care and they're not going to pull their own weight. But even he did a great job. His notes look different than the rest of us, but they weren't necessarily bad. And that's one of the things I liked about this experience, because it kind of opened my eyes to what really matters and what doesn't matter in notes. Sometimes people would spend way too much time on like grammatical things or presentation things in their notes to make them look nice. And, by the end of the semester, we weren't doing that at all. We were just focused on getting it accurate, getting it concise, getting it understandable. But some of the like stuff that could make it prettier, like we weren't really doing that anymore. We were just about utility. And I thought that was kind of refreshing and helpful to do as a team. Yeah, great question, Emily. I'm seeing this next one here about block class schedules. We usually had, and you're absolutely right that there is an assumption there. So you may not have 20 minutes ahead of a particular course. Maybe you've got classes stacked back to back. Thankfully, I never had that. But if you did have it, what I would do to address it is just meet a little earlier prior to the first class. So if you got 2 classes back to back, meet 40 minutes before. Devote the first 20 minutes to the first class, the second 20 minutes to the next class. That actually saves you some time in one way because you're only gathering once and you only have that little bit of small talk at the very beginning. So you actually save some time that way, but it's not as ideal in that you're not chunking it up quite as much and it's not like 20 minutes right before class. And so it's super fresh, but that's how I'd handle it. If you had a block schedule, you could you could do 3 classes in an hour if you had 3 classes back to back. And I feel your pain if you do. That sounds rough to have 3 classes back to back. All right, so let's talk about the other thing that I'm really passionate about, and that has to do with audio. And it's already come up a little bit. Talked about Dragon, talked about audio case briefs. Something that I would highly recommend is recording your notes once you've condensed them and you've made an outline with them. And you'll learn about outlining in school. There's no correct formula for an outline. An outline is just a way of synthesizing material, making it concise, really trying to isolate the critical concepts. It's basically like taking tons of case briefs and just kind of melting them together and making sure you're getting the key take-homes from each of those cases and seeing how they weave together. A lot of times you'll have outlines, passed around from class to class. You might have upperclassmen that share outlines from past classes. Those can be helpful. Definitely look for those. But there is some value in outlining on yourself by yourself, and just getting used to the idea of trying to connect a bunch of dots that might appear disconnected. And so there's a learning value in the outlining process. And I found during my law school experience that you can take pretty much every course and get it down to short enough that if you record it, it could be less than an hour, which sounds crazy, but I think you can cover, 90%, 95% of what you might come up on a final in just about an hour of really concise audio outline. And so that was always my goal when I was going to law school. I would take my notes. Having been a TV reporter, you're used to taking things that are kind of long-winded, lengthy, and just dumbing them down and trying to get to the core. And so that served me well. It took me a ton of time, though, and even as a good student, there were a lot of inaccuracies in my audio outlines. I still ended up doing really well, and I actually didn't know about the audio outline inaccuracies until after I graduated and started working on commercializing audio outlines through Crescendo. But if you have the time and you are an auditory learner, there can be amazing freedom with audio outlines. They took a long time for me to make. I didn't worry about how well I voiced it over. I just take my phone or record on my computer and I just read over my notes really quickly. And then I would listen, at the gym or hiking. My freshman year, my 1L. My 1L year, my first semester, I remember with torts, one day, the day before the exam, I just shot free throws the entire day while listening to my audio. Because I figured if it wasn't in my audio, there wasn't really a good chance that I have an opportunity to really get it into me that last day. And so I just stuck with my audio and I listened to it 10 times while I was shooting hoops. And it was therapeutic for me, got my blood pumping. there's great evidence about how when we're physical, right, we get endorphins, we breathe, we pump our blood, more than just sitting on our rear ends. That can be beneficial for our brain processing speed, but also our memory and retention. And so I gleaned some benefits from that. One thing that my audio outlines kind of evolved over my law school experience. I got more toward recording smaller chunks at a time, and so I could listen to those on repeat. And if you're into education and pedagogy, chunking is a concept that comes up a lot. And so you don't eat the elephant all at once, you eat a nibble at a time. And so rather than just recording an hour and listening to that hour over and over, and being an hour removed from the last time you heard the thing, maybe record in 5 to 7 minute chunks. And then in the space of 20 minutes, you've heard it 4 times. You might start feeling comfortable. Certainly by the 7th to the 10th time, you're feeling like, oh my gosh, like I got this. I know which words are even coming next. Like I've almost got it verbatim. And then you move on to the next. And so chunking audio that you record for yourself is a great idea. And then toward the end of my law school experience, and certainly while I was studying for the bar, I got the idea to do kind of a summary audio where I take the really, really critical stuff that seemed like highly testable because there's a lot of interwoven elements or a bunch of factors layered on top of each other or a bunch of exceptions to exceptions to exceptions, the really complicated stuff. I would isolate that and I'd record that in just like 5 to 10 minutes and have that be kind of my really, really important review that wouldn't spell everything out, but it'd get me so nothing would fall through the cracks. And so I'd listen to that primarily right before the exam. So I did end up doing really well at BYU, which is very competitive, ended up graduating summa cum laude. And I credit a lot of it to this audio outline approach, which worked for me greatly, and also to the study group that we had. If you don't have all the time in the world and you want some good commercial product, there are a couple audio outline companies. There's one called Audio Outlines, there's one called Audio Learn, and then there's Crescendo. Those are really the 3 main law players that I'm aware of. And obviously I've got a preference for Crescendo because it's my baby, but I'll tell you what we did to try to make it a little bit cooler than some of the other audio, and far, far better than the audio that I recorded for myself. So first off, it can take a lot of time to create audio outlines. And it can also take a lot of time to come up with mnemonics or memory hooks. Mnemonics can be acronym based, they can be phrase based. Going to elementary school, like never eat shredded wheat was how I remembered, northeast, southwest on a compass. And everyone's had mnemonics in their life. And there's some mnemonics that are more involved than others. There's some mnemonics that are called memory palaces, where you use your spatial memory, you visualize a place, and you visualize things that represent key concepts. And those are things that can be so valuable for retention, long-term and immediate, but you don't really have time, to put together yourself. And so Crescendo we've spent tons of time in creating what we think to be are the best mnemonics in the industry, and include memory palaces. If you're familiar with Sherlock, there's some of that kind of vibe is what we're told by students. But part of the reason for this, when you create something for yourself, obviously it's going to be memorable, right? Because you created it, you remember what got put in, you remember what got left out, you can fill in the blanks, you can use a little bit of shorthand, and it's fine. And so one of the challenges with any commercial product is how can you make it memorable, even if someone else didn't create it? How can you make it so users ultimately feel like, oh, that's my outline. I'm so comfortable with it that it's as good as if I created it myself. But it didn't take the time to create my own. And so mnemonics and memory palaces were a way that we feel like the listener can create with us by visualizing places and things, and kind of seeing seeing things in their mind. And so we spend a lot of time on mnemonics. We have expert professors, vetting, confirming accuracy. We use audio flashcards, which are basically like a buddy, sitting beside you, quizzing you on the key mnemonics throughout a course. And so we took the basic summary audio that I had kind of come up with during law school, and we made it even better. We made it into an audio flashcards where it's hitting the same critical stuff, but it's in an audio flashcard form. And so you're asked a question, the audio pauses long enough for you to think through or verbalize the answer, and then confirms the answer and moves on to the next question. And so as far as I'm aware, there's no other audio flashcards on the market from any other law school study aid outlet. We also have classical background music, optional classical background music for each subject, and we use different songs, with the theory being that can further aid in chunking. If you tune out for a second, you tune back in, you can go, okay, I know we're still in the context of negligence because the negligence song is going, and it's not super dominating. And there's been research about music helping with study, and it's kind of a two-edged sword. You have to do music right for it to be helpful. If it's too dominating, based on your level of sensory tolerance, it can be detrimental and distracting. But if it gives you some rhythm and can keep you engaging, then it can be helpful. But we certainly recognize not everybody can study with instrumental music in the background, and so we provide both the non-music and the music versions of all of our audio. So those are just a few of the things that really separate our product from other companies. And again, if you have the time, you can make your own audio outlines. Even if you're using something like Crescendo too, it's a good process to go through, and it's a good way to just get out of the library for a little bit, go to the gym, and mitigate your pre-test anxiety. So I swear by it. The crummy audio outlines that I made during law school, I shared with my study group, because we shared all of the outlines that we created together, and that was also another benefit. That's how collaborative we were, and I benefited from their outlines. They told me they liked my outlines, and actually when I graduated, and this is kind of what got me into starting Crescendo, because my goal wasn't to start a bar prep, law school study aid company when I went to law school. That was not the vision. It's just something that just happened naturally because of the things that helped me when I was in law school. When I graduated, I'd still have classmates ask me, like, did you take that course? Do you have an audio outline for that course? And they'd be like, yeah, sure. And I just kind of hand them out. But they weren't very good in that they weren't very, they were semi-accurate because obviously I did well in law school, but not as accurate as commercial product can be when you've got, multiple layers of protection. And then they didn't have mnemonics and things like that. They weren't recorded in a professional setting and everything. And so, but just knowing that people wanted my crummy audio outlines just helped me realize maybe there's a market for this. And actually, when I was studying for the bar, a good friend of mine came up to me and said, hey, I will give you $50 a subject for your bar audio outlines. I hear you have bar audio outlines. And I've been using another commercial product, and the bar audio outlines that I created were just for my own personal use because, I had permission to use the product for my own personal use, but not for reselling it or any kind of commercial context. So I didn't feel comfortable selling it to my friend, but it helped me realize, look, there might be a good market for this. And I remember him just saying, like, I just want to go golfing today and not feel guilty. And so I really just want, your audio outlines. Can you just give me? So anyway, that's a little bit about Crescendo and Crescendo's audio. This is my last little sales pitch about Crescendo. We're coming up on the hour. In addition to the audio outlines, audio flashcards, all that jazz, hundreds of proprietary mnemonics, we have 2,000 plus official NCBE practice questions. So the NCBE is the company that writes the uniform bar exam, which has been adopted in 30 plus states. Texas just jumped on the bandwagon. New York jumped on a few years ago. Ohio is jumping on the bandwagon. And so more and more states are using the Uniform Bar Exam, and we rewrite our materials to the Uniform Bar Exam to help students, and we use official real practice questions. So like we've already got the essay questions from the February bar, and within a month or two we'll have the actual essay questions from the July bar in all those states. And so our students get lifetime access to all that. They get the actual bar grader point sheets so they can see exactly what the bar graders are seeing, you know, in terms of concepts that need to be covered in any of the essays. You know, they're getting legitimate MBE questions, which are the multiple choice questions. And actually every single state and jurisdiction in the United States, with the exception of Louisiana, and I think Puerto Rico, uses the MBE as part of their exam. So like even in California, they use the MBE. And so we get a lot of customers from California that will just buy our MBE products to get the actual MBE questions and to practice the MBE content and memorize that with their audio outlines. We also give the written outlines. You know, we actually recommend that people read along the first time they listen through, just to make sure they're hearing everything clearly, and also the structuring of the written outline can help you with your retention. We give everybody a 30-day money-back guarantee, no questions asked. You don't have to give us a reason. Thankfully, we don't get a lot of refund requests, but we know this is a different approach, you know, to memorizing content. And law students are risk averse. Like there's not a lot of us that are just natural early adopters, right? And so we understand that, and we're accommodating that. And so you can try all our stuff, any of it, all of it, for 30 days for free and just see how it feels. And then, you know, I mentioned we have professors vetting our stuff, so you're not just relying on, you know, this young punk like me who recently graduated from law school. And then you get lifetime access. And so we actually sell our full-on bar prep and release it immediately when people buy it to 1Ls, 2Ls. And we've even sold, you know, product to 0Ls. And so if you contrast that to other bar prep courses, you usually pay a heavy, you know, a multi-$100 deposit, and then a few months before the exam, you actually get the product. And so this is a way that you can get the product, benefit from the product. And if you ask people who've gone to law school, they all say, man, like I wish I had done some bar prep earlier on, because it really would have helped me on finals. And I know a lot of times people go, as students, just kind of naively, it's easy to think like, oh, I don't want to worry about bar prep right now. It's just going to stress me out. I'm not going to think about it. But in actuality, like doing some bar prep, not stressing about the bar. Definitely don't stress about passing the bar. But using the bar prep type materials will help you significantly in your preparation. So, you know, a lot of people have said some great things about Crescendo, which we've been very grateful for. We did get a really big complaint that I'm flashing on the screen here. This is a couple months after our full launch last May, and they were just annoyed that they hadn't heard of Crescendo sooner, which was super nice of them. This is like my favorite email, because it was both a complaint and like one of the biggest compliments. Sometimes people are worried about, you know, using bar prep early on because your professor might focus on particular nuances or have hobby keys, if you will, that they gravitate toward. But the way I look at it, you know, Crescendo, while it's written to help you on the bar exam, it covers the nuts and bolts of all your bar related courses. And if you get those nuts and bolts, you know, that 80 to 85, maybe even 90% of core black letter law for a course early on in the semester, you know, in the first 2 weeks, you just nail it. You know, you go on some hikes, you listen to our contracts audio, you know, for 10 hours straight one day, and you're like, oh my gosh, like I got contracts top to bottom, the nuts and bolts, I got the black letter law. Then the rest of your semester, I mean, you're just listening intently to your professor, paying attention to the little nuances that might not be in the more, you know, general bar audio, which isn't going to have all the majority and minority rules and things like that. But you can capture that more readily, and you can recognize it for what it is, because you already have the fundamentals. knocked out of the park. So any questions before we wrap up? Let's see here. I really,
there's a few questions.
Okay, let me see.
Some previous things that we've talked about.
Okay. Have you had a chance, Grant, to look at any of those? Can you summarize any of them, or is there any in particular that you'd recommend I start with?
Rita's.
Okay, Rita's got a great question.
Does your note follow any particular structure? How should students organize their notes? And would you suggest digital notes or paper pencil notes?
You know, there have been studies about the physical process of paper notes and that being very memorable. And I don't think those are things to be set aside. There's certainly efficiency that's gained from electronic notes. You can copy and paste, you can reorganize, you can edit and revise a lot easier. And you don't run the risk of like losing a paper or having your dog eat it or something, you know. So I don't have a strong recommendation about paper or digital notes. I think it's a preferential type thing. Certainly when you're in class, it could be helpful to do paper notes to show your professor you're not on your computer necessarily playing games too. But at some point, you're going to want to digitize your notes because that will really help you in the outlining process. In terms of particular structure, you know, you'll find with case briefs, and I recently published a blog post about case briefs and structure, that you can get a lot of different variations of the same, like different groups will use different terms and chunk the different parts of a case differently. But I mean, you just need to cover what's the core rule that came out of it first and foremost. And in order to understand that, you need to understand the basic key facts or story of that case. You need to understand kind of the reasoning behind the rule and how the rule applied to those facts in that case. Sometimes you need to know the case history or the procedural history. And I don't really think there is a right way or wrong way to do a case brief or to do an outline. That's very individualistic, but you can see some examples. We have an example of a case brief on our website that we published actually recently in a post there. Regarding the structure of our notes, the NCBE actually puts out an outline of the core topics that are covered on the bar exam, or at least the uniform bar exam. And we tried to mirror those outlines very closely so folks can know that we're covering all those bases. We actually started to shy a little bit away from following them, you know, not verbatim, but you know, with exactness. We still cover the bases, but now that we have a little bit more credibility and we're more established, I feel like we have more flexibility to reorganize things for pedagogical purposes. And we have that flexibility because people are trusting us more. But initially, we just wanted to make sure people knew we were covering everything the NCBE asks for students to be aware of on the bar exam. And so, but those aren't always the best pedagogically. I mean, their secured transactions list of topics is horrendous in how it's laid out in terms of pedagogy. It would take you like 4 times as long to teach you the same thing by using their organization. So we departed from their organization completely, but still cover the bases there. So let's see. So the group that I described was a 1L experiment, but we've had other 1L groups use it. And we've also had 2Ls and 3Ls, but again, it's trickier because you might not be in all the same classes, and so that would just be for 1 class or 2 class. A lot of times professors will have old exams already published online somewhere, or you could ask them to early on in the semester. And I think professor to professor, it's going to vary how far back they go. And I do think that is an interesting idea. Sorry, I'm assuming you can all see the thread as well. I'm reading Emily's comment from 141 of looking at exams and taking past exams into account as they approach the subject matter for that week's reading. Wow, that's like a really good idea. If you do have access, that would be very interesting, because you could flag some things and look, in these past exams, like these topics have come up, and this case addresses some of those topics. So you might want to zero in some more. To answer the next question, you can certainly upgrade. What we do is we credit 80% of past purchase money toward future purchases that incorporate those past purchases. So if you buy, contracts outline, and then you buy a package that includes the contracts outline, we'll credit 80% of that. Obviously, it's a little bit of a pain to do that process for us and for you. So we encourage and incentivize the package purchase. But so that's why we don't credit 100%, but we do credit 80%. And so that's just a matter of connecting with Grant. Actually, he usually helps people out with that. He's back here. And actually, I'm going to give you Grant's email real quick. I'm just going to type it here. I know some of you may need to go, may have only planned on an hour, so I just want to mention this before I get to the next questions. And I'm happy to stay on as long as you guys have questions, for the next half hour or so. But this is Grant's email, and he takes the lead on helping new people try out our stuff. And so because you came to our webinar, we'd like to offer you each one freebie. So you can go to our course page. Let me go to our shop page. Any of these $37 courses, and you can choose one. You just email Grant, and he will send you a personal discount code. So like civil procedure is a really popular one because it's such a hardcore course. Depending on your law school, you might not have that the first year though, so you might want to wait if you're 0L to see what you have. I'm sharing the screen right. Let me see. Yeah, okay. Yeah, so any of these $37 courses, we can hook you up with one, lifetime access for free. It won't have practice questions, but it will have the written and audio outlines and the audio flashcards. And yeah, let me go to, let's see here. Let me go back to the chat. Sorry, I'm wandering. Okay. And by the way, one thing that's kind of exciting, as a small company and as you grow and stuff, we just bought Crescendo.com. I know sometimes people see .net and they go, oh, like that sounds scary. Like maybe that's not legit. Like people just assume .com. There was somebody that was kind of squatting on .com, and we finally negotiated a deal. So we'll be segueing over to Crescendo.com in the near future. But right, the F model problem. Electronic notes have the F model problem. And re-asking a question. Sorry, missed the mark, Emily. Thank you for holding me accountable. Did you incorporate the experience of 2Ls and 3Ls? Who had already taken 1L classes and the materials they created as hand-me-downs. Ooh, I get your question now. So sorry, Emily. Or did you just create the materials within your group? We just created them within our group, but that is so interesting. Like if we had found basically in the next group of students found some people that would be interested in our notes and shared them, I'm sure they would have been appreciative. And you wouldn't have had the benefit, of those 20-minute meetings with an expert there, but the notes were certainly valuable. And I don't know if you could get like 2Ls or 3Ls to take the time to come and still, tutor, but I think that's really interesting. I hadn't thought of that at all, actually. And I think that's a really interesting way that you could help future classes, or look to the classes above if the model becomes more popular. I do think there's something to be said though for just like the process of reading critically and writing thorough notes, because that's a huge part of just law practice and will help prepare you, for the bar, prepare you for finals and everything. And there's value in being able to meet together with the author of those notes, but hand-me-down notes are very interesting. I never had any students from the class after me ask for my class notes. but aside from outlines and stuff. But that's a really interesting question, Emily, and I'm sorry I don't have a very good answer. Well, I do. I mean, we did not incorporate the experience of 2 Ls or 3 Ls. Maybe we should have. It's a good idea. And we did just create the materials within our own group. So I did answer your question, but maybe not as helpful. Yeah, and certainly there are ways you can get hand-me-down outlines. We had outline banks for a lot of the clubs at our school, and certainly for those where English wasn't their primary language. But I mean, you'll be able to find outline banks at your school, and they're helpful, but take them with a grain of salt. You know, sometimes things change from year to year. Sometimes the author isn't, you know, necessarily the best poster child for that particular course. But if you can find like the outline of the kid that got a 4.0 in the class, you know, that could be really helpful. Gotcha. The F model problem. I totally get that. And that's actually one thing that I think is great about audio. And another reason that doing handwritten notes can be good. Let's see. Alrighty. But I would say electronic notes are super handy for like organizing concepts and for revising and editing and perfecting. But they do have their limitations. Yeah, so go ahead and email Grant now. If you could email him within the next like 20 minutes, if you are interested in a free course, that'd be great, because then we'll know it's actually people from this webinar, not just randoms. Yeah, that's a great point. On a tablet screen. Okay, yeah, so, and one thing I will mention about the practice exams, Emily, because this goes to the point you just made. The content that we provide is all online and digital. You can print things out, and that's one thing that makes our bar prep course a little bit cheaper, because we're not printing out a bunch of books for people. We're using more of an online app-based experience, but there are some limitations to that, like you've identified. Okay, any other questions? Really appreciate you taking the time to join me today, just blab on and on about my experience, and I hope some of this has been helpful. You know, I'm super passionate about this stuff. I'm passionate about education. Emily, it sounds like you've got a lot of experience and insight on education, so it might be fun to chat with you a little more offline sometime. But I appreciate the questions. I'll just hang on here for a few more minutes if you have more questions. If you're really bored, you know, sometime there is a funny video on YouTube that we posted as kind of our big sales pitch for Crescendo when we launched last April, and in terms of having all our content. And I think I've got the link in my slide here, but if you just Google, like, oh, that's not how you spell YouTube. It's hard to type under pressure, people watching. Something like that. This video right here with this comedian called Jason Gray, it's pretty funny and explains our product in a fun way. So if you want a good laugh, but these tips and tricks videos are actually invaluable. We found that more than anything in terms of marketing, these videos are helping spread the word about Crescendo. So anywho, thanks so much. I'm just going to look one more time at the chat box here. Where'd it go? All right. Well, thank you. I'm just seeing thank yous now. Feel free to email Grant if you have questions. You're going to get lots of emails maybe today. Sorry about that. You can also email support@crescendo.net or sales if it's a sales-related question. And our number is to the Crescendo office is 385
Changed to all panels and attendees.
Oh, all panelists. Yeah. Oh, shoot. I've been writing things
Yeah.
and only writing for just panelists. I apologize. Thank you, Grant. So that's the phone number for Crescendo too, that you can call anytime, and support at crescendo.net is the email. So I'm going to sign off now. Thank you guys so much, and hopefully, we'll be connected in some way in the future, but if not, good luck. Thanks, Steve, for putting this on. Good luck, guys.